All right. It is 12:01 Central, 1:01 Eastern. I'm going to go ahead and get this kicked off. My name is Julie Lawson. I'm the Director of Operations and Partnerships over here at the LPF, and it is my pleasure to host today's webinar. Today's webinar is From Incident to Accountability, Reducing Retail Crime Through Collaboration. Today's webinar is sponsored by ALTO. ALTO is the last mile in asset protection strategies. By supporting retailers to deliver consequences for those who disrupt the safety of stores and their teams. Presently, ALTO operates in 26 states across 37 metro areas throughout the United States, having established partnerships with over 20 national and regional clients. For additional information, please visit www.alto.us. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and go over a couple of logistical items. So today, you were muted when you came into this webinar. It will be also available. This is being recorded, so it's available in case you need to step away from your computer and revisit it later, or if you want to share it with someone later, this will be on demand. And then if you have any questions, please pop those into the Q&A space instead of the chat. It makes it easier to make sure that we hit all of the questions, or as many as possible as we can. And then it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Today we have with us Esther Alcaraz, and she is the Manager of CS and Growth Development at ALTO. And with her, we have Hector Pearson, the Vice President of Asset Protection for Rite Aid. And so I will go ahead, Esther, and turn it over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Esther Alcaraz. I am the Client Services Manager over here at ALTO. Originally a staff attorney when I began at ALTO in March of 2022, after having been a criminal defense attorney for 10 years and a local prosecutor down here in Miami. So very thankful to be here and educate everyone in the loss prevention asset protection field, along with my amazing partner, Hector Pearson, who is our corporate client over from Rite Aid. So to begin, we just wanted to kind of go over some educational tools so that you understand why the critical post-incident processes are so important. So most of our retail partners and most of the retailers out there have such a thriving asset protection team and investigators, and are able to put together these great cases and turn them over to law enforcement. And then law enforcement takes them and arrests these offenders. And so what happens post-arrest but pre-adjudication is so important. And that follow-up is so necessary to get a critical outcome, right? And so I just wanted to be able to kind of shed some light on those processes of what happens post-arrest. So as soon as that investigation closes and that offender is arrested, that case falls into the hands of the prosecutor. And it's the prosecutor's decision and their sole discretion of whether or not to proceed with that case, whether or not they're going to file formal charges, and whether or not they're going to seek a certain type of sanction. If a victim retailer is not empowered through that process, the case can fall apart. The case can slip through the cracks. Evidence might not be turned over. Store manager might not be contacted. The case may never even be set for trial, and it goes unresolved. And so many of the asset protection teams at this point believe that the case is over because the offender was arrested and an arrest happened. But in reality, the case never took off if the prosecutor never actually followed through with it, or the case was never actually put through the system. So it is essential to build a partnership with the local prosecuting authority to make sure that these cases are appropriately handled and that the case is seen through to the outcome. What that outcome will be will obviously vary from case to case, whether it be traditional incarceration, whether it be an alternative sanction, or whether it be some type of mental health treatment or drug offender treatment. Whatever the case may be, a consequence has to happen for actual recidivism to stop. So that is kind of the process of the post-incident arrest and then pre-prosecution. So before we get into that, I would like to take an opportunity to again introduce Hector Pearson, who's going to be working with us today in this presentation, and kind of get his background and why we started this relationship. Go ahead, Hector.
Well, awesome. First of all, good morning, good afternoon to everybody who's joined the call. Again, my name is Hector Pearson. I'm the Vice President here at Rite Aid, and a whole range of experience here. Been here about 3.5 years. with Rite Aid, but been at CVS for 12 years, been at Big Box and other retailers throughout my career. And this is a really fun topic, just because this is really one of the larger challenges that all retailers are experiencing around, how do we get through and a support of some of the recidivism issues that we have with shoplifting, and how do we then continue to go through the legal system. And ALTO and Esther and the team have been awesome partners in helping us maneuver through that, and really excited to share those experiences and our experiences specifically at Rite Aid around our journey.
Excellent. So Hector, I wanted to talk to you regarding incident analysis. What do you do as a retailer regarding the incidents and some of the accountability you hold in getting those incidents reported?
Sure. Well, if I can even start back, I think one of the things we found is this has been an ongoing challenge for all retailers around, just how do you document effectively, and how do you make sure you support the ability to get these cases resolved. For us, it would start internally with, we had our own accountability, around just understanding where are our big opportunities. So it was around what tool are we using to document these cases? How do we make sure that we train the store teams to effectively communicate and document the right level of information? How do we make sure that we support the prosecution case with video and showing up to court and having really good information? So it really started there for us. And I'll give you one fun example. At early stages, we were calling the police for everything. We were filing police reports of all levels of documentation. It was low value, high value, and really understood that we were creating pain points for law enforcement. As much as law enforcement would like to come out and take a report for everything, the reality is we had to be very selective. So we created thresholds and improved our case management tools to make sure that we documented the right level of information, and we called law enforcement when it was imperative and it was necessary for their support. So some of those things, Esther, were kind of our initial accountability. So then we can work forward with, making sure that we did show up to court, make sure that we did have a process to pull video for law enforcement, to make sure that we were able to identify recidivism incidents or individuals for prosecution. And then really the step that you highlighted was really carrying that all the way through the post incident, through the going through the legal system, working with our law enforcement friends, ensuring that there is some conclusion, whatever that may be. If it's an actual somebody being arrested and prosecuted for a length of time, or somebody just going through an alternative program, but it's having some conclusion. So in our case, our Rite Aid business is not just continue to be victimized because there's no consequences. So those are really starts with your own accountability through your own programs, your own policies, your own training, and then really through what Esther mentioned is all those other processes post really helps you kind of get some success stories.
Definitely. And so what I'm hearing from you, Hector, is it's really important to kind of align with the strategy and policies internally to make sure that there's consistency throughout your entire operations of when you are seeking law enforcement intervention and the follow-up, because ultimately you kind of want to set the tone of when you're going to seek that arrest, when you're going to seek that law enforcement intervention. It's not something that you're taking lightly. It's not something that your team is taking lightly. And you want to make sure that law enforcement themselves understand you're doing the right things, you're making the right policies, you're not wasting their times, you're not wasting their resources. This case is going to be pushed effectively through the system. So taking that in mind, what do you look for in terms of collaboration with law enforcement?
Yeah, I think it starts with, typically this collaboration with law enforcement in the past has always been around, the AP team or the loss prevention team reaching out to law enforcement, but it really even goes beyond that. It's making sure your store teams, your store managers, your store associates understand who their local law enforcement patrol officer is, or local precinct they may be able to connect with. So it starts at that ground level, making sure that, AP today can't be in every place, every store. So making sure that you've created a process where there is collaboration. Your store leadership team should know who the local law enforcement contacts are, or also, who are their local community outreach and people that are advocating for, shopping centers, malls, and other centers. So it starts there. And clearly, from an AV perspective, where you have to be bought into the process. So if there is, a precinct or a lieutenant, a sergeant, or an officer who's key in your community, we have to know that person. In some cases, the way you know that person is collaborating not just with law enforcement, but other retailers. Some of the best things we've learned is collaborating with other retailers that are competitors or other retailers that are different than ours, and understanding that they have a relationship that we can kind of learn from and build off as well. So it's all of those pieces together to making sure that you are leveraging that outreach, whoever may be, and it's just make sure you're there, right? One of the worst things you can experience is if there is a law enforcement community meeting and you're not participating, yet on the same point you're complaining that there's challenges in your business or your store. So making sure that you're there. We gone to community meetings where they're talking about all types of stuff. If it's around parking lot issues and homeless and other things, but at some point they see that Rite Aid or your company or your business is there, just participating, it goes a long way, and it really starts establishing some of the relationships.
Yep, exactly. Hector, you just brought up a really good point that your AP personnel can't be everywhere at one time, right? What do you do when internally sometimes you have to make those decisions where maybe you do not have all the available AP resources, and so you're relying on the store teams? What are some of the challenges and solutions that you've come up with when that happens, especially when building that relationship with law enforcement?
I'll share everything. We don't have it all solved. I think it's always a progression. If anyone has it solved, please put it in the chat. But it's really around being narrow in your actions and your focuses, right? For us, it's identifying those recidivative issues, those recidivative individuals. So we may have incidents all the time. At the end of it, it's probably a small group of individuals that are driving some of the biggest opportunities in your stores or your business. So it's really identifying those and then sharing those internally with us. We share bolos with our store teams. So making sure that that cashier number one understands that that guy with a red hat who's a recidivist, we want to make sure that there's some follow up with that individual. So part of it for us is to being very narrow and focused. Ideally, I like to be able to say that we impact everybody, but it's really much more narrow and around who is the recidivism, and then working with our local teams and then working with our law enforcement. And then we've also reorganized ourselves in a way where we can build resources because, like all companies, you're dealing with limited resources. And then for us, make sure we have individuals who are targeting those recidivative individuals and making sure that we can at least run them out of our business through prosecution, through some other court mandated program, or making sure that they're just not welcome based on their activity today.
Absolutely. So what you said is so accurate in terms of sometimes it's just a small percentage of people that kind of, do the most. And as we've talked about before, just talking about the criminal justice and the bigger picture when we're teaching in the lectures, it really is kind of something like 15% of offenders commit 85% of crimes, right? So having your store team collaborate with law enforcement and your AP team to really identify those individuals that most impact your store, and then collaborating with law enforcement with those bolos or with whatever type of internal policy you have, whether it be an email blast internally or just having that conversation with, remember, this individual always likes to come between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. and take, when you're doing inventory and the back boxes are out in the back, keep an eye out for them. I mean, it's integral. So you're kind of relying on your store team members to be AP members in training, but at the end of the day, they have to do their actual job, which is to make sure that your shelves are stocked and to make sure that they're, making a profit. So when you're talking about limited resources and pulling them all together, it's almost the same challenge that law enforcement has, right? And so we have to take an opportunity to kind of shed light on the same issues that law enforcement has, where they also have limited resources and need to kind of use them as much as possible. Where do they tend to focus, however? Closed mouths don't get fed. When you come in with a united front, and as you said, when other retailers that are experiencing the same types of problems that you are, and you're information sharing, and you're attending the community events, and you're hosting the community events or a coffee with cops, they tend to gravitate towards solving those issues first. They come to the top of the pile, right? And so transitioning from law enforcement aspect now to the prosecutor's office. So what have you found to be effective in actually getting the cases pushed through the system to conclusion?
Yeah, no, I would share with you. It's almost the same formula that you're using with the store, and it's the same process you're looking for the DAs or the prosecution team is understanding their pain point. For us, it was around show up to court, right? Simple as it be. And so we complain about all these issues, yet they see these reoccurring cases where nobody's showing up to court because of all ranges, right? They didn't get the subpoena. Maybe the associate was uneasy. Maybe they were scared. Understanding the pain point there. The other one is they weren't provided all the information, the video to a really good documented narrative to a box up, or there's details that they need to be able to prosecute. So some of this is understanding the pain point of law enforcement and why maybe they are just so easy to dismiss the case or not react to it because of our opportunities. But beyond that, then knowing that we will show up, right? We will be there and we will be actively involved in the case. If it's, making sure that an AP person is reaching out to the store and saying, hey, you got to be in court tomorrow. What can I do to support you? Or, through some of our recent partnerships with ALTOs, they're there as a, in a capacity to support Rite Aid. All those things are there to make sure that the prosecutor has confidence in the organization and ultimately in the case. And then I think that's one of the bigger pieces I would share with you, that we have some incremental wins throughout different parts of the country where we're just showing up, we're understanding the pain point, and we're following through and advocating for ourselves as a victim.
Yeah. I think step one is showing up, right? So as long as you show up, a lot of things can happen. If it's the prosecutor has absolutely no incentive to follow up with the case. If nobody's there in court, it's very easy to write it off as a dismissal, case closed, and they can focus on the dozens of cases that they have in their desk. And so it's imperative to make sure that you show up and that there's follow-up. And so when you're in that post-incident pre-adjudication, that follow-up, was the subpoena complied with? Did they receive the evidence? Is there a good contact between the store team member that witnessed the event and the prosecutor's office? Is going to, again, move that case to the top of the pile and ensure that something happens to the case.
And so if I can add one component to this,
Absolutely.
you were talking about this is around, also understanding how, I would like to say every DA is the same, but they're not, right? They have different motives, different focuses within their specific areas, and it's making sure we understand that as well. In some cases, it's around collaborating with, a lot of these markets have different counties, different areas, so you're trying to collaborate among them, saying, hey, in this county we've had this success, we're doing this. So it's collaborating among themselves, just like law enforcement collaborate, just like retailers collaborate. The district attorneys collaborate, those attorneys collaborate. So making sure that you're trying to say, hey, I've been working this case over with, this county here. This is some great successes. They will mirror that. They'll be curious. So just making sure that you're bridging those among that community just as well as we do with law enforcement.
Absolutely. And I think you make a good point where you have to be multifaceted in understanding the approaches you take to each individual prosecuting authority and each individual law enforcement agency, because as you said, so many things come into play, so many policies come into play, and knowing and kind of having that kind of intellect to come in and look at the situation and know this is how to best navigate in this courthouse is very essential. You don't want to go in there, and start off on the wrong foot. So that's a really good point. How have you felt about legislation, especially now in California with Proposition 36 and its expansion of the availability of sanctions to retailers that are victims of crime? Have you seen it impact yet?
Yeah, no, we were talking through this with others recently around. So in Prop 36, for those who don't know, it's a proposition in California that just helped kind of reinforce some leniency on laws that were enacted some years ago. And it doesn't address everything, but it was definitely address some of the issues around, hey, how do you elevate crimes from these repeat offenders to how do you make things much more, a higher level of consequences for those individuals committing these high thefts, right? So, that Prop 36, passed by almost 70% of the population. I was sharing with others that, that's a big, outreach from the state of California, from the citizens saying that they were frustrated with, some of the videos of that you were seeing with folks just kind of blatant stealing. So this has helped us because we started seeing already, law enforcement feeling that now they can do much more than they were doing before. This is not a release program. This is not just writing somebody a ticket. Now they're actually making arrests and they're charging people with felonies who are repeat, recidivative issues in our stores. So that's been a big change for us. We also found the bad element didn't pay attention to these laws, and they're being surprised. Well, what do you mean that I'm being arrested? So we're seeing that shift of people's behavior change. And again, it doesn't solve everything, but again, I got to give that this is around localized, retailers, localized businesses. This is about localized law enforcement. Everybody kind of getting together to kind of identify an issue and understanding that larger laws require larger involvement and maybe a longer road to make changes, but there are things that we can do. And that's a great example, and specifically in California, where these changes occurred through this community of everybody coming in there and saying, that no matter what spectrum you may be on from a political perspective, that there's change that's necessary. And we're starting to see the impact of that change. Again, 4 months into the program or into this new law, we're starting to see some of that impact in our stores today for sure.
Definitely. And what you mentioned is perfect, because the offenders themselves are startled, right? They're not used to accountability. And that is essential. If you do not have the accountability, you won't have the deterrence, right? They are not deterred by an arrest, especially in a landscape like California, where an arrest might just be a piece of paper, or as you referred to it when we first began talking months ago, click it and ticket. You get the ticket and then you're right back in, right? So having an arrest and that post-critical follow-up to accountability, that is where the deterrence begins. So
Master, if I can add one color to that, is
yes.
that part of that law specifically talks about recidivism, right? So if I'm not documenting the cases, no matter what they may be, or having the right level of information, even attempting to file a police report that maybe doesn't involve an arrest, but building up that book of business. So when in this case, so you can start putting these cases together and saying it's not a $100 incident, now it's a $10,000 incident because of this individual's activities for the period of time. So it's that effort that needs to happen. If it's in a law like in California, to the work in New York City, it's all making sure that work is essentially, because it builds eventually some level of consequences.
Yes, absolutely. And as discussed, California residents were fortunate enough, and retailers and victims of crime were fortunate enough, that there was a legislative response dealing with it in Proposition 36. But let's move over to New York, where thus far there hasn't been that legislative push yet. What are some of the the grassroots agendas that can happen in a space where there isn't a direct government response yet, where it's just relying on the community stakeholders?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, New York is something that from a Rite Aid perspective, we have some great stories and great wins there. And I got to give, Doug Horsting, who works in our AP team, a lot of credit, because he and others have just started building this grassroots effort. Like you talked earlier around meeting with precincts, to meeting with community outreach, to all these rural grassroots efforts, to now having the NYPD, connect all these practices among all their precincts, to now supporting businesses like ours and others around doing blitzes, to making arrests, to compiling cases into one case. And then now with that, the city has actually built a task force that we are part of with the mayor's office. So all that started with just this ground root effort of just knocking doors, being ankle biters, not going away, and really understanding what are the challenges in New York City, what are the pain points they have for us, what's important to them, how they measure their performance, how they measure the activity of law enforcement there, and then making sure we can support that. So that's a great example of today. We have a big seat on the table around New York City. The mayor and others are doing some things too. Now this has evolved to the prosecutors, right? The prosecutors are all banding together. They're asking us to work on our trespass process, so making sure that they can charge people with these reoccurring charges. So if you come back to a Rite Aid or another business, they've expanded these charges. We got civil enforcement going into the bodegas and doing things around there. All part of this community of just saying, hey, can we help in our own ways to support the business, because they don't want businesses to go away. So that's a great example where it starts small, it grows big. We've not made all the legislative changes. There's some great activity going on in New York City and the state of New York to make some changes, but it's starting there, and we've had thousands of arrests, based off of just some of these partnerships that we weren't able to do, years prior.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because you're not allowing it to be passive. There's an active response, right? You're not waiting for the legislator to come save you. You're banding together with your local community, with your stakeholders, with alliance members, and you're making sure that something happens. Okay. And it's going to be baby steps. Obviously, you can't change it all in a day, but the fact that you're having the buy-in from the DA at New York, and they're talking to you about the trespass signs is incredible. And I think it just goes to show that when the prosecuting authority is making a decision on their case, they're kind of looking at it, as we used to call it when I was a prosecutor, the four corners of the affidavit, the four corners of the arrest incident report, right? there's so much more of a story outside of that paper. And if you don't talk to the retailer, if you don't talk to the victim, if you don't talk to the AP personnel responsible for investigating that case and really get the full story, you're never going to reach a successful and appropriate outcome. Because if you just rely on the the four corners of the affidavit, the four corners of the arrest paperwork, it's lost.
Yep.
So the fact that you're making those connections is pivotal to really ensuring that the process is seen through. And then when you're seeing the conclusion of the processes, talk to me about, your position on what an appropriate outcome would be, or what an appropriate time to use an alternative sentence, or something you've seen happen in court, one of your cases that has been resolved.
Yeah, so not every case is the same, as you know, Esther. So I think that you have folks who are maybe going through some type of dependency issue, going through some challenges that are still wrong, need to be prosecuted, but there may be alternatives that the court provides them, if it's a drug rehab or some other alternative support. We have organized retail crime. These are bad elements that are doing this for business. Those individuals require a more stern response, because they are impacting not just a store, but probably the whole company, if not other parts of the company. So I think there's ranges that, and making sure that you have to be open to those suggestions. You have to be aggressive when you need to be aggressive, but you also have to be somewhat tolerant when there are other remedies for folks who are literally maybe making decisions based on just their ills of time. So I think it's just making open to it. Again, you won't know that until you're having those connect relationships with the district attorney's office, understanding programs and things that they may offer. But be open to the idea that you push back, right? In some cases, you may have a scenario where a district attorney's office is trying to find a much more lenient, easy way out, and you do have an advocate. You do need to voice your pushback, saying, "Well, wait a minute. This individual has been responsible for tens of thousands of dollars of losses. This is not somebody who's having a dependency issue. This is somebody who's just a bad element that needs to be prosecuted." And that's where too often we are hesitant to push back on that piece. But again, we do have advocates. We should be able to advocate for ourselves, and that's where it's okay to push back. Doesn't always work, but it's more that prosecutor understands that your retailer, you're backing it all the way through. You're going to challenge it and challenge it all the way through. And I'll tell you, this is a great piece where we just started our relationship with ALTO, and they become this relationship that we've been leveraging in remote cities to kind of help us through that when there's those opportunities come up. And we have some great wins, as you know, where we're able then to pursue those high level of sentences of people that are just bad and need to go away for a longer period of time.
Agreed. Something so much as, instead of charging with this individual with 5 instances of a misdemeanor, why can't we roll it up into one global felony and seek a better sentence?
Absolutely.
Those are the you're right. Those are the conversations that need to be had, and you kind of have to push back a little, because that's it's diplomatic, but when it's appropriate to seek that. You're not going to seek that for a first-time offender, but if it's an ORC offender that has been impacting your store for the last 3 years and you have him nicknamed as Johnny, you're going to want to seek that appropriate sanction. So
I'll share something with you, Esther. I think that it goes back to, listen, having those relationships with the DA's office is important, but when they know that you as a retailer are talking to the DA, or you're talking to, high level, law enforcement, brass, they just grab your attention. They know that you're invested, and when you're invested, they know that they're going to make sure that they follow through to whatever the letter of the law is, and then be much more receptive to your pushback than if you're not engaged in them, and also you're coming out of the woodwork because you want to pound your chest. That's where you're going to get into some challenges.
absolutely. From your expert view, what are other key initiatives that you would like to follow up with for your strategy this year?
Yeah, no, I think for us, it's, we're centralizing more and more, right? So, we understand that, like all companies, we're just dealing with, less resources, and, we're dealing with a lot more challenges. So we're centralizing more, like companies, we've created our own security operations center. And part of that is to take steps away from the field, right? So we're pulling the video for incidents, so we can have those videos pulled centralized. So we're freeing up the field. We're putting cases together ourselves so we can package them up so the field can just kind of drive them through. So part of our strategy is just more centralized. If we can remove steps from the field to the store and take those steps out there, we think we're going to be much more impactful going forward. And then we're just using different technologies and services, trying to make sure that we're using the best available resources and technologies out there to help us deal with this problem. And if it's around a good case management system to a partnership, that we're having like with ALTO to other technologies that are out there to help us just put all this information together is kind of our short-term, long-term strategy here at Rite Aid.
Excellent. All right. Anything else you'd like to say before we get to the Q&A?
No, listen, I would just close up with saying that there are a lot of opportunities that I know I've seen. I've heard it from people in our industry that you will. There's a lot of finger pointing, and there are frustrations. Clearly, the amount of retail theft all of us are experiencing is at a high end, and it's a very frustration that many businesses are experiencing. But I would tell you, use that same energy and frustration towards solutions. There are some great solutions out there. This is a great example to share. There's a mix of other trades out there where you'll find some folks that have maneuvered through, figured out some ways to maneuver through this new environment, and you can have some great success and ultimately support your company.
Absolutely. And I appreciate experts like you, retailers like you, leaders like you that are setting the tone internally for your organizations about remaining positive and remaining focused on the outcome and making sure that you are doing everything in your power that you can do. So many things are out of our control or not within our power. And instead of being frustrated by what we cannot control, we are empowered with what we can control. And it begins with the individual store team leaders, what they're reporting, what the follow through is with those cases. So I thank you for that.
No, absolutely.
Julie, do you want to
We
go to the
are-
Q&As?
Yep, sounds like we're ready to go to the Q&A. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate learning more about this side of well, the after effect, like what happens after. And so that's something that I've never had the opportunity to kind of get into. But with that, let's jump in. We had a lot of questions come in for through registration, specifically about a lot of different topics. So we're going to try and get to all of those, followed by the ones that have come in live, just because they have already been able to see these questions that have come in during registration. So let's kick it off with, what are the current trends in retail crime that businesses should be aware of? Now, Esther, there was a live Q&A question that kind of ties into a potential trend. So feel free to address that if you want to as well.
Okay. Trends that retailers should be aware of, again, are ORC style cases, the ORC that is now transnational, trans community, crossing state lines. Again, information sharing, even though it feels counterproductive because you think you're helping your competitor, it's a different feeling altogether. It's not who's going to get the product. It's how can we collaborate together to put an end to crime affecting us, right? So these organized retail theft members are very well organized. I mean, they have storefronts on Amazon. They're running like products across the United States to ports outside of the United States. So if we're not collaborating and information sharing, they're going to continue and they're going to grow. Once that collaboration and information sharing happens, again, banding together for the best possible prosecution. When you have multiple retailers affected, you can have ORC statutes. So we're not even talking about repeat offenders. We're not talking about low-level grand theft. We're talking about ORC statutes. Like, for example, in Florida, we have that take it from a third-degree felony all the way up to a first-degree felony, which is potentially punishable by 30 years of state prison. So that more collaboration and the more retailers that get involved, the bigger the case will be, the bigger the available outcomes. And then again, what is appropriate for that person? What are we seeking? What is the restitution? That can be worked out, but at least you have the maximum availability to you to seek that outcome than just being pigeonholed to a small misdemeanor. So those are some of the trends that, I've been seeing recently.
Perfect. Hector, anything else you'd like to add on that?
I was going to add just on the trend piece, and so trends vary by market, right? So yes, you do see some global trends among product selection, product type that's stolen throughout the whole country, but there are localized issues where you got to stay close to those trends as well. So it could be in California, it could be cream, cosmetics, skincare, and it could be in New York City, it can be detergents, and so making sure that you stay close to those trends, and as Esther mentioned, just got to collaborate. The other piece is get a hold of the trainer early, right? There are demands that are being asked by the bad element to go after certain product, and we'll learn about it in time. but the store associate, the store management team, your localized teams can learn very quickly that all of a sudden you're seeing a trend of a new product type. The faster you can get that among your stores, shared among all of you, you can start making some actions to help mitigate some of those issues. So those are some of the things I'd add.
Perfect. So the next question that had come in was, why does post-incident resolution often stagnate after law enforcement takes action, and how can we address this issue?
Yeah, so as explained, post arrest, it falls into the hands of the prosecutor. And a lot of prosecuting authorities kind of have like a screening unit where it's in limbo for a couple weeks where they're deciding, are we going to move forward with the charges or not? And so if they do not have subpoena compliance, if they do not have witness contact, if they do not have a clear narrative spelled out about why they should prosecute this case, it ends up being what's called a no action. We are seeking no further action. We're not accepting this case for prosecution. As you can imagine, subpoenas get lost in the mail. I can't tell you how many prosecutors have called me and be like, I called your store and I can't get through to anyone, that it's a robot the entire time. And I was like, well, I have a secret number for you. Let's get you that. So, but they're not going to sit on hold for 20 minutes, press 006 and talk to whoever. They call once, it doesn't ring, and they're like, nobody wants to do anything with this case. No further action. So it hits a wall in that kind of screening unit. So you have to really push for that prosecution and get that case pushed through the system when it's kind of in that limbo.
And Asher, if I can add one thing to what you mentioned, I think having those relationships where that DA knows maybe they have a case and it's a Rite Aid case, and they know, oh, I can call this person because I met him at this meeting, or I know this person through I have his cell phone. So some of that is just making sure that you and your team make yourselves accessible. So there's a lot of challenges, as Esther mentioned, around getting the case and all the details they need, but knowing that they can call somebody and maneuver through all those buttons that you mentioned, Esther, is essential. So just making sure you make yourself accessible. So you could be that person that's getting that call and going, hey, I'm about to drop this case unless I get A, B, or C. That's a big key as well.
Exactly.
I think that's really good to recognize that they may only have a certain amount of time that they can actually dedicate to this specific case with all that's probably on their desk. So that makes sense.
And especially when an offender's in custody and speedy trial, they're like, okay, nobody called in 3 days. He's in custody, speedy trial, let him out. And we don't, that's counterproductive.
So with that, the other question that had come in, it kind of ties to some of the things you might have already answered, but in case you want to expand on it at all, can you explain the role that prosecutors play in determining the next steps after an arrest? You had mentioned that they determine, is it going to be prosecuted, but is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Absolutely. So it is 100% discretionary what a prosecutor charges. The judge has nothing to do with this. Law enforcement has nothing to do with this. This is solely the prosecutor's decision. How many charges? What style of charges? If they will seek enhancement penalties, all that falls within prosecutorial discretion. So if they're not seeing the full picture, they might move forward with the inappropriate charge. If they have communication and they get what I said, like outside of the four corners of the affidavit, they can seek the appropriate charge. Hey, you only got arrested for one incident, but this individual actually came 9 days before and did it 3 other times. I have the CCTV for that. I have a witness that's available to be deposed if needed. We're seeking 10 additional charges and we would like to move forward with that. And again, they also have the ability to file the enhancements when they're repeat offenders. So maybe the law enforcement officer, the rookie cop, the beat cop didn't write the information down correctly, but we can actually 3-strike them, or we can move to file them as a habitual offender. This is the stuff that falls completely within the purview of a prosecutor, and you can push them to make those correct discretionary calls. Obviously, like Hector says, you can't be a bull in a china shop. You have to do it diplomatically, but you have to ask for it.
That's great. It's great that they have those tools to their, at their disposal to be able to combine cases and take that step further. So that's really great to hear. Okay, moving on. Hector, before we jumped on the actual live part, we were chatting and you had mentioned, and I actually specifically wrote it down, empowering your store team members. So this question is to you, and I'm sure you'll probably speak to that a little bit. But what steps does Rite Aid take to build strong partnerships with the legal system and the community in addressing retail crime? From the registration form, it states that Rite Aid operates from the registration form, in the states that Rite Aid operates in, how have you worked or partnered with law enforcement, local, state, and or federal to combat ORC thefts that might be considered an out-of-the-box approach or
Sure.
tactics?
Again, it really does start with, what are your policies? What are your training within the organization? It really starts there, right? There's certain limitations that we're asking from the store associate team, the cashier team. It's very limited. It's to document. It's to report. It's to gather the information we need around an incident in the store. So it really starts with what are your policies, what are your training, and what are your follow-ups? Because what you don't want is employees trying to become ORC agents themselves and do things that are definitely put themselves or the company in harm. So it really starts there, and I think beyond that it goes into what is your program, what is your company program to deal with this issue here, because too often you're going to find that companies have hundreds of different programs and none of them really are coordinated. So having a company structured approach toward, in this case you're dealing with prosecution, follow up, how do you deal with recidiv issues. For us, our out of the box thinking, and I use the New York example because that's one that we're super proud of, is the amount of participation that we've been able to get in New York City through the work that team there has done is a model what we're using today, at least for Rite Aid, around all the other cities in Philadelphia, in Los Angeles, in Seattle, because it's a good formula for it to work, right? It's a collaboration, it's an approach, it's making sure that it's not just talking to the beat officer, but it's talking to the police department, it's talking to city halls, talking to the prosecutor's office. It's and then as we talked earlier, just being very narrow. I'm not trying to solve all world problems. I'm just trying to solve a very structured element of issues impacting the specific market. And all that has been kind of I don't know if it's out of the box thinking, because I think a lot of people are doing elements of it. We're just trying to structure it in a way that we can show the investment and the results that, again, too often we talk about shrink and loss, but we're really trying to just create a good environment for our customers and for our associates. And indirectly, as we get these bad elements out of the store, our customers are much more comfortable shopping. Our employees are much more comfortable working in these stores. So it's really having a structured approach, measuring it through, making sure that, yes, it's going to change in New York and LA a little bit because the laws are slightly different, but the process is the same. And that's going to help us get the best results. And again, we're starting to see a little bit of positive momentum in LA. And if you were to tell me, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they weren't talking to retailers. And today they're helping us do blitzes. They're helping us clear out different issues. They're working with the highway patrol in California. They're doing some phenomenal things because we're following through with the things we can do around the cases, the video, and then we'll show up when they need us. So I think those are some of the processes that we'll take through and gets us a little some success.
For sure. And
Definitely.
I'm sure that it probably also helps that you're creating that package for them. Instead of just saying, go look here, it's here's everything that we've done. Can we do anything else to help you? Here's everything that we've done to hopefully put a nice bow on this for you. Can you help us?
Yeah,
Definitely.
Some of the questions that have come in live have been revolving around CCTV, whether it's dropping cases or being able to prosecute without having CCTV evidence. Esther, can you speak to kind of some of your experience or knowledge in that area?
Sure. So as a former defense attorney, I would say no face, no case, drop it, no CCTV. And obviously, I have a very persuasive personality, so the prosecutor would listen to me. As a prosecutor, however, I would say, show me the statute that says that you need CCTV video to prove this case. It doesn't exist. This is simply a policy decision that has been made by prosecuting offices in order to bring down case files. Like, simply put, the law doesn't require CCTV to prove that something happened. In fact, you can prove a case without CCTV if you have compelling narratives, if you have compelling witness testimony, all of those things. How you present that to the prosecutor without coming off harshly, very differently. But ultimately, they're wrong for dropping a case without CCTV. It doesn't mean they didn't happen. It just means CCTV wasn't available. The crime happened. And if you have a witness that can identify that individual in person, hey, that individual, Johnny, comes every day, he wears a red shirt and he wipes out my entire cosmetics counter, and Mary knows him in the back and Tommy knows him in the front, and he rides a scooter and goes right down the highway and goes north. Why do I need CCTV? I feel completely empowered that I can identify Johnny in court. And If the jury believes me, the case is closed. Now, do prosecutors want to do that extra work? No. They're individuals too. Some of them are good. Some of them are lazy. Some of them want that really, really easy win. But it doesn't mean that that's the law. Like, the law doesn't say you need CCTV to prosecute a case. That's a policy. And I will say, the state attorney's office is an elected official for the most time. And when the people are not happy with what they're doing and the policies that they're making, they can get them out of office. You've seen that in California with recall elections. So again, a policy decision is very different than what's the law. The law doesn't say you have to have CCTV to get a conviction on a case.
Now, the question, one of the other questions that had come in live was saying that if an AP agent viewed it via CCTV versus live surveillance, that they're seeing a trend. Maybe it's in their area or with their specific prosecutor, but that they're dropping the case. Is that something that you've seen?
Yes, that's the same thing. We've seen that as well in Miami, where they want an in-person ID and then the AP individual can tie them up to the rest of the events in CCTV. When we can work together, we can figure that out. I've had my AP professionals, I will tell them, this case is set for court on Monday. The defendant's going to be in person on Monday at court. Bring whoever saw him on the CCTV, come to court and look at him in real life and say, yep, that's the same guy, and you work around that issue. So again, what is the law and what are the policies are very different. You have to kind of know how to navigate it and know how to use the law in your favor and how to get the result that you want. And prosecutors are busy, they're stringent, their resources are tied too. So how do we navigate it together to make sure that the end result is there?
And I think it goes back to that collaboration and communication and being
Absolutely.
available to them, right?
Julie,
Absolutely.
if I can add one point to this, and again, I don't think this is equal to every company, so I'll say this first of all, but when you're having those run-ins where, there's decisions being made that maybe you don't agree with, or maybe there's a prosecutor or a judge, I saw the question there about a judge making decisions. Too often at times, if you have your own legal team within your organization, right, and they're proficient or they have some skill set, that's a group you can reach out to, right? They can actually, sometimes, and Esther knows this, lawyers speak differently with the lawyers. They have a different relationship, right? Just like cops talk cops. And so in some cases, bringing, some legal representation into a meeting, a discussion, or some correspondence back and forth about something maybe you as an organization is not happy with, could actually help or hurt, but more likely help. Just create a level of breakthrough the communication, and maybe you'll learn something that as a retailer or your policy that you're doing that is actually hampering your ability to prosecute the case. Or it could be the opposite. To Esther's point, if DAs feel no resistance, they're going to do what they want to do. But if they feel like, oh my God, this Rite Aid person's going to keep calling me, or they're going to have someone's letter coming out to me, they're more likely going to perk up and maybe pay attention. So those are just little suggestions I would suggest to anybody who's having those issues. But you got to be relentless if the issue is really that important to you.
Absolutely.
All right. So we've had a couple of questions like come in live or in the chat revolving around recidivism. And so one of the questions that we actually had during registration was, how can businesses better engage with legal authorities to ensure that offenders face consequences and reduce recidivism? Am I saying that right? I feel like I'm saying
Yes.
Okay. And then one of the questions that had come in live was also saying that they're even seeing judges dropping cases, even though they do have folks that fall into that category. So what options do they have even at that level? So past, it at stage 1, but when it gets, let's say, to stage 2, to help reduce that.
Yeah. So not to get down, because each jurisdiction is so different and every market has its own opportunity and challenge. But ultimately, all 50 United States, and there was a push for it to be a constitutional amendment for victims' rights, okay? As a victim, most victims have a right to give a victim impact statement in court. Do AP personnel and store teams feel empowered to do that in the middle of open court? Probably not. They're nervous, they're scared. They just paid $40 for courthouse parking. It's freezing in there. It's not easy to just walk into an open court and say, I want to say something to a judge. That's kind of like where Hector was alluding to, that for attorneys, that's their entire profession. So it's easy for them to do that. But before a case is dismissed, you have the ability to make a victim impact statement, and you can tell the judge what impacted you about the crime that has been alleged. Most of the time they call up the case and you see it. It's kind of like 50 cases at once. Nobody knows what's going on. All these names being called, people running around, but they don't hear from the actual victim. So of course a judge is dismissing it. He's like, who cares?
Yeah, when I was in my former days as a retailer, I would fill out many victim impact statements that we would mail back or fax back or email or whatever the case was at that time. Gosh, fax. Who uses that anymore? All right. With that, let's see. There was another one that kind of tied to that as far as making apprehensions, but law enforcement is they're trying to figure out how to get law enforcement to just change their stance on taking these individuals into custody so that they can see an end to their repeat offender. I know that one of the things that I had seen previously was talking about they may take them into the back, get their statement, and hold them, and then law enforcement arrives, and then they just give them a summons, but then they're in the store the next day. So how can they get law enforcement to change their stance on going ahead and taking them to jail or where they need to go next? And not
Yeah.
giving them a summons.
Definitely. Again, open communication and collaboration. My first line of thought is get a trespass order as quickly as possible. If you have those signs available to you, to put them outside of your store, that way when they are receiving that summons, you say to the officer, I also want them trespassed. It's like on body worn camera. That way you're taking matters into your own hands. You can't control the policies of the police department, but you can control your store. That is a private business. And if you do not want an individual there, it's not like you have the right to shop at Rite Aid. That's not a right. Like if Rite Aid doesn't want you there and they put you on notice that you are not wanted there, you cannot come back. The notice is through the cop or the officer as he's issuing the summons. That way you have that for the pendency of the case. Even better when they're arrested and they're taken to court and the judge tells them you have to stay away or you're given a trespass order. But I think it's imperative to have that line of communication with law enforcement and tell them, I do not want this individual back. She's continuing to harm me. I want to protect my store employees and I want to protect my store. Issue a trespass order, issue a stay away order.
I think
And Esther, I'll to add that some cases that violation of the trespass is much more powerful than the actual theft that they just committed to. So it's part of that kind of leveraging the laws that of today. And there's a lot of frustrations out there that are going to take a longer road to change. But there's just, you have to be relentless and got to find different ways. So the example, and I hear often, well, the officer doesn't do anything, right? Well, maybe we haven't done a good job connecting with that precinct or that branch or that station area, making sure that we talk to that officer has a supervisor, and then how do you educate them? And that supervisor has a supervisor. So now you're kind of educating them that I'm not going to call you on everything. I'm not calling you on the dollar incident. I will call you on repeat incidents that happen in my store. I will give you the information, and that one person is responsible for all of this other crime. That from a law enforcement perspective, imagine they're able to close up 10 incidents with one arrest. You got to speak the language. You got to identify what motivates them. And one of the things we found in one of the cities was law enforcement has stats that they're held accountable to. And if you learn those stats, you can understand how you can help them indirectly going, hey, I'm not going to flood your system with 911 calls because I'm going to reduce your 911 intakes. But I'm also going to help you make your arrest because we're going to clump all these cases into one. So you got to maneuver through this it's not perfect and it is work. And I'll give a lot of credit. We have a ORC community out there of AP professionals that are doing some phenomenal things with, federal legislation to local legislation, and they're going to continue to make these inroads. But until now, you got to find a way to maneuver through this versus just becoming the victim.
I think you hit the nail on
Absolutely.
the head. You have to identify what motivates them. I love that.
Yep.
All right,
So true.
so we're going to start closing things out here. Esther, what final thoughts could you share on businesses that are looking to improve their post-incident process?
I would just say, make sure that you're followed up, empower your store team, empower your AP team, not to be afraid to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, what's the status of my case? What's the resolution going to be? Okay. So again, you don't want to be victimized over and over again. You don't want to be victimized by the offender and you don't want to be victimized by the system. So you have a voice and you have an opportunity to be heard. So use it.
All right. And then with the new partnership between Rite Aid and ALTO, will ALTO be assisting the AP team with court proceedings and representation?
Absolutely. That is our bread and butter. So we have staff throughout the United States that are either legal assistants, staff attorneys, OLCs, which are our operations lead counsel and senior staff attorneys that are there to help navigate all of our retail clients through the system and ensure that their voices are heard and that they get the resolution so that accountability happens.
Perfect. And then Hector, I'm going to close out with you. Any last things that you'd like to say, like how Rite Aid has innovated with your strategy, or just anything else that you'd like to add?
It's no. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for both of you and everybody that joined the call. Great conversation, great opportunity for us to kind of continue to move this conversation forward. From a Rite Aid perspective, listen, we're evolving. We're emerging from a lot of different things from a business perspective, but our strategy evolves with that. We may be smaller as an organization, we may be smaller as an AP or AP team, but we feel we can do some mighty things through many of the things you heard today, right? Centralized collaboration, trying to go after the right levels of the points of the business that we're impacting. And I think that's going to be our go forward strategy as we evolve. And just from this point, also, I'll share with you, be involved in every opportunity you can, if it's a local or see, Orca to some type of localized meetings to so much trade information. The foundation does some great stuff. There's a great information there. There's information for you to take action within your own local challenges. And that would be my parting thoughts for this group.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So first, thank you again to ALTO for sponsoring today's webinar. We do have a promo code that's available through the end of this month. Somebody was asking in the live chat, what certifications would they suggest from somebody out in the field or all the way through the executive level? We do have our loss prevention qualified and loss prevention certified certifications. So please, if you're interested, the LPQ is going to be for somebody at the beginning of their career. And then your LPC is going to be with somebody that has been in the industry for 3 years or longer and is looking to elevate their career to the next level. Hector, thank you for having your LPQ, and Esther, thank you for
I didn't list it on my name, but yes, I went through it, so I'm definitely
Yes. So Hector has his LPQ, Esther has her LPC. They can both confirm that the certifications do provide a lot of quality information. So if you'd like to get one of those or even get a lifetime membership, please leverage that 20% discount. Feel free to contact me and ask me for more information. With that, the Loss Prevention Foundation is going to give out 5 course scholarships today. They are non-transferable. You do have to have attended the webinar. So those will be sent out by the end of the day tomorrow. So keep an eye on your inbox because you do have 5 business days to claim that. Then from there, I would like to say if you are a VP or an executive on your team or would like to share this with an executive on your team, our fall meeting, our annual meeting has now been rebranded to the LP Leadership Summit, and it is an invitation only event. So if you are a VP or an executive and or would like to share this with your executive team, please feel free. This is, again, loss prevention leaders getting together to elevate the industry, share best practices and knowledge. So please feel free to share that. Ask me for any information on that. So feel free to email me, julie.lawson@losspreventionfoundation.org. And last but not least, if you are not already subscribed to the Loss Prevention Foundation and have a profile to get your webinar notifications, please scan that QR code. It's going to tell you how to register for a guest account. It's free, and all you have to do is sign up, and then you will get notifications for the webinars. Otherwise, feel free to follow our LinkedIn page. We always post them on there as well. Thank you so much to ALTO for sponsoring today's webinar. And Hector, thank you for joining us. This has been incredibly informational and informative. I will get the chat and Q&As over to ALTO so that if there's anything that they still need to follow up with that we did not hit upon, that they can follow up with you. But thank you so much. I appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you.